Hey spooky people, if you're like most people, you associate the 79 AD eruption of Mount Vesuvius with the city of Pompeii, especially the casts of bodies that can be seen there. I wanted to highlight a town that most people are much less familiar with that was also destroyed in the eruption, called Herculaneum. Herculaneum was actually located closer to the volcano's crater, but unlike Pompeii, did not experience the heavy ashfall that characterized the first stage of the eruption. It was buried under a much thicker layer of ash deposited by pyroclastic flows in later stages. This means that excavation has been much more difficult due to the denser, thicker ash deposits. The slower excavation has meant that preservation techniques were more advanced for much of it relative to Pompeii. Today, you can walk the streets of Herculaneum, and because it is so well preserved, you almost expect people to still be living and working there. From the detailed frescoes and tile work to the street-side restaurants. It is a city suspended in time. Part 2 is out now. This is part 2 of the story of the destruction of the city of Herculaneum by the 79 AD eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Fair warning, it's about to get spooky. Up until fairly recently, archaeologists believed that most residents of this wealthier seaside town were able to escape as they hadn't found many bodies relative to Pompeii. Then, in 1981, archaeologists made a gruesome discovery. In the boathouses below the city, they found over 300 skeletons of people who had huddled there for safety. They would have been quickly overwhelmed by the hot ash and gas racing down the slopes of the volcano at speeds of over 50 miles per hour, with temperatures in the boathouses rising well above 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Many of the victims are seen clutching their belongings, including amulets, money, and jewelry. Some even had their house keys, having died fully expecting that they would be returning to their seaside residences. Posed in the positions they perished in, these skeletons are a grim reminder of the power of the still active volcano that looms just a few miles away. Herculaneum Part 3? Okay y'all, we're talking about Roman house keys. I was also really surprised to read that they had house keys almost 2,000 years ago. But that's Roman ingenuity for you. Mechanical locks have been around for about 6,000 years, having first been invented in ancient Egypt. These original locks and their keys were entirely made of wood. The Romans improved upon Egyptian and later Greek lock designs by introducing metal into their construction. Just like locks today, they had specific pin patterns that were manipulated by keys to open them, although they were somewhat less sophisticated. As some of you suspected, having a lock, and therefore belongings valuable enough to lock up, was a status symbol to many ancient Romans. Some would even wear their key around their neck. Perhaps this better explains why some of the Herculaneum skeletons were found with their house keys. They just happened to already be wearing them. Part 4 is out now. Here's Herculaneum Part 4. One of the FAQs on my original videos was if the citizens of Pompeii and Herculaneum had warning that Vesuvius might erupt. Volcanoes and earthquakes go hand in hand, so what we would now recognize as characteristic earthquakes preceding an eruption, the citizens of Pompeii and Herculaneum had no context for. They thought the shaking they felt was the same as the earthquakes they'd experienced in the past, so the eruption caught them completely off guard. Because they were spared the ashfall that affected Pompeii in the first stage of the eruption, it's thought that many people at Herculaneum successfully fled the city in the 12 hours before the second stage sent a series of pyroclastic flows to bury their city. Another great FAQ was why those in the boathouses didn't try to jump into the ocean. Pyroclastic flows or surges are dense clouds of searing hot ash, gas, and near molten pieces of rock. Due to the heat and speed, it's likely that within seconds of the flows pouring over the top of the boathouse entrances from the ledge above, they were dead. I could talk about Herculaneum and Vesuvius all day, so here's part 5 of probably many more. There was originally about 1 meter of beach in front of the boathouses, so they were close to the water before the eruption. Archaeologists are actually working on uncovering the beach right now. During the eruption, it seems that there may have been some mild tsunami activity that caused water to recede away from the shoreline. We know this from an eyewitness account from Pliny the Younger, who I'll talk about in a future video. It's unclear to me, though, what the timing of this was relative to the pyroclastic flows overwhelming the city. This picture gives a great sense of just how thick the ash deposits are that buried the city. The boathouses are the arches that you see in the middle of the bottom tier. The eruption completely reshaped the shoreline at Herculaneum, extending it further into the ocean, like the smaller pyroclastic flow deposits you can see in this picture at the base of Mount Soufriere. Even if the boathouses were still close to the water's edge, we know that pyroclastic flows can skim across the water's surface like you see here, and here. This is Herculaneum Part 6, and we're not done yet, folks. Another great question was how the eruption was perceived in the surrounding areas. We have detailed accounts of how the eruption played out as well as some of the rescue efforts thanks to a man named Pliny the Younger. In fact, we named the style of eruption that occurred at Mount Vesuvius after him, a Plinian eruption. Pliny the Younger was across the bay in a town called Misenum and was able to observe from afar. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, perished trying to rescue people in the city of Stabiae. From Pliny the Younger's letters, we know that it was dark for 2 days as the eruption cloud blotted out the sun, and even in Misenum, 18 miles away and upwind, they experienced ashfall as the eruption cloud spread in the upper atmosphere. They felt blasts of wind from the pyroclastic flows burying Herculaneum across the bay. Once the eruption ended, some people returned to Pompeii to try to salvage valuables, but both it and Herculaneum were abandoned and forgotten over the coming centuries. This failure to reoccupy the cities speaks to the great trauma felt by people in the region. Here's part 7 of my series on the ancient city of Herculaneum. In this part, I wanted to address the questions I've gotten about the differences in preservation in the bodies at Herculaneum versus those at Pompeii. At Pompeii, the bodies you see are actually plaster casts, so the skeletons are still there, they're just encased in plaster. After they died, their bodies were buried in ash from ashfall and pyroclastic flows. After some time, their soft tissues would have slowly rotted away, leaving just their skeleton in a pocket of air. The ash deposit around them must have lithified enough to not collapse. Archaeologists fill these air pockets with plaster to see a 3D representation of the person and their body's positioning. The bodies at Herculaneum were also buried in ash, but the deposits were much thicker and all from pyroclastic flows. Some studies suggested their soft tissue was quickly burned completely away by the heat of the pyroclastic flows, but newer research suggests it may have been slower and more akin to cooking. Either way, my guess would be the compression from the thicker ash deposits and interaction with groundwater collapsed or filled in air pockets. This is Herculaneum Part 8, and I think we're finally coming to the end, although I will be making more Vesuvius, Pompeii, and volcano content in the future. First, I'm so glad that several of you pointed out that there were additional cities destroyed by the eruption. I had no idea, and I was so excited to look them up. Stabiae has at least 2 villas you can visit. They are called the Via San Marco and Via Ariana. I mean, look at these. I have to go back. Aplantis also has an archaeological site which is located in the heart of modern-day Torre Annunziata. This includes the Roman Via of Poppaea, which is thought to have belonged to Emperor Nero's second wife. Finally, I want to give a quick nod to one of the coolest discoveries that was made in Herculaneum. This is one of a set of carbonized papyrus scrolls. Over time, historians and scientists have been able to unroll and image them to actually read these ancient texts. It's totally incredible. Okay, I couldn't help myself. Here's a part 9 on Herculaneum. The Herculaneum papyrus scrolls were discovered in 1752, and there have been various attempts to unroll and transcribe them over the years. There are a total of around 1,800, and to date over half have been unrolled. They represent the only surviving library from the classical world. One of the earliest attempts was by Father Antonio Piaggio, who made a special machine to unroll them. It took 4 years to unroll a single scroll because it had to be done so slowly. Today, imaging techniques are being developed that don't even require the scrolls to be unrolled, thus ensuring they are not damaged. The scrolls include many Greek philosophical texts, notably books from the magnum opus of Epicurus and his follower, philosopher and poet Philodemus. There are also scrolls of poetry and prose. Recently, fragments of the text Histories by Seneca the Elder were discovered, which likely contain important details on Roman history. New scrolls continue to be excavated today, and archaeologists think there are many more to be found. So I wanted to stitch this to an amazing video that user Superfluous did on the final moments in the boathouses and their theories about it. They have these awesome visual aids, but their stitch and duets are turned off. So once you're done here, make sure you go check that out. In the meantime, I'm here fully in my pajamas because I'm too excited to tell you about information that was just released about one of the skeletons found on the beach at Herculaneum that supports this user's idea. So the skeleton seen here and in the previous picture is known as Skeleton 26 and has long been known to have been a soldier, but new evidence suggests he was actually a high-ranking one and may have been part of the official rescue effort by the Roman fleet. This was the same rescue effort that resulted in the death of Pliny the Elder across the bay at Stabiae. His skeleton was found on the beach near a boat, suggesting that those in the boathouses were just about to be rescued when the pyroclastic flows hit, killing them and their rescuers, which is absolutely heartbreaking.